with my friend passing, I recognized something. I became a accidental death doula. Totally accidentally, like, it wasn't on purpose, but I did what a death doula would do. And so I wanna talk about this because I found it just a fascinating kind of, like, revelation. So, I would say after the memorial service, I sat down and I was like, "I need to look into being a death doula. I think I know how to do that." And I thought to myself, I'm like, I think that's what I was. Now, I said that without really only hearing about being a deaf doula casually. Clearly, I've heard it before, right? But, I didn't look too deeply into it. And then I came home and I had to take a bath. And most people who talk to me at some point talk to me while I'm in the bath. And I'm in the bath, I'm talking to one of my best friends, and I was like, you know, funny conversation. I was like, "What do you think I'm doing right now?" She was like, "You're in the bath." I'm like, "Yes." And I was so happy that she knew that. I was like, "Oh, you know me. I'm in the bath. You're right." But it's also obvious because there's like a little echo. But I don't care about that. Um, and I was telling her, I'm like, you know what? I feel like I am interested in maybe looking into what a deaf doula is. And she was like, "Oh yeah, that's what you were doing." I'm like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "That's what you were doing. You pretty much were being a death doula." I'm like, "Oh." I said, "Well, I felt like there was a connection there." So I want to talk about that a little bit if you all have ever been interested in that or you thought about it or what it means. But for me, a death doula they help the person who's transitioning. So there's people who are out there who somehow understand that when someone's passing, especially when it's like a illness and something that you know is going to happen at some point, people need support. And so I recognize this more so after the memorial, that connection, because I realized I did something that not a lot of people could do, meaning her friends who really liked her and cared for her and who really liked her as a person, they weren't there. So, meaning they weren't physically showing up. They might have visited her once, but never came back. And this was a thing that happened to where, in the end, it was just two people who were consistently seeing her, and that was me and her other friend who actually were the co-facilitators, and of course the family. But it was just an interesting understanding at first. Like, there's two feelings that you kind of have, right? The first feeling is like, well, why couldn't they be there for her? Like, how could they be so selfish? And then there's the truth. The truth is like, well, hold on, let me step back and see like what's really happening. And once kind of people knew, I guess, my little role that I had in her life, some of them would come up and be like, "I'm so glad that you were able to be a support to her." And and then they would say something like, "I tried to see her and I saw her once and then I just never." And I realized what it was. And there were people who I know would see her once and that was it. And it was because there's a lot of different reasons, right? When you are not feeling well and you're not feeling yourself, you don't necessarily want people to see you, right? When you are, and that's what my friend told me. She goes, "Yeah, there's a lot of people who say, 'Don't come to see me, don't come to visit me,' because they don't want people to see them not at their best." And so it takes someone who can see them and they feel that, right? So I was able to do that, but that was because I already had that experience of working with people with disabilities and visible disabilities, right? So, I mean, they didn't look normal or look like the average person, but my job was to, of course, see them for who they were, right? And so I already had that experience of working with people who did not look like everyone else, and then still working, and then you work to do it at first, and then it becomes natural. Then you just see them for who they are, you see their spirit. And so that was something that I was able to do for her. And it was something that I knew instinctively, it was like a calling. It really was. When I decided that I would show up like that consistently, um, that was it was a decision that I just said, I'm going to do that. Now, it wasn't always easy. And there were times where, especially because we were in a pandemic, that if I felt a sniffle, if I felt like the slightest sense of discomfort, I wouldn't see her. And so sometimes, that might go for a few weeks because I just did not want to take the risk of hurting her or causing any harm, right? Even though I knew the whole time this thing was terminal, but there was still this part of me of just afraid to do that. So it wasn't like it was easy. My mom was a really good support for me. She was my own doula, if you will. She was my death doula support. So like she was helping me along the way to be to help her. It takes a village, people. But then I thought about all the people who probably didn't have that, right? One, they probably didn't have the training. They didn't have, and I didn't, and I got that training inadvertently, right? It wasn't like I sought out to have it. It's just that having caregiving experience, and approaching caregiving the way that I did, it allowed me to be able to be there. And so I think that's why she didn't mind. I could see her in any state, and there were times she had a lot of dignity, and there were times where it felt like I, she didn't necessarily want me to see her weak, right? She didn't necessarily want me to see her not at her fullest, and I would just show up anyway. And sometimes I wasn't sure if I should be there. I won't lie. There were times where I was like, man, should I be here? Is this too much? Is it too hard for her? Like I didn't know, right? I know there was one time where I really felt like she did not want me to be there, because she was declining and she didn't want me to see that. I don't know, like didn't want me to be disappointed and all in her or whatever. And I kind of like backed off for a little bit, and then I just said, okay, I'm gonna go for it. I'm glad I did. I'm glad that I did that because it was worth it. But there was moments like that, and that can be difficult on both parties. But I just kept showing up, and refused to have to see her as she was. It was funny because she was in the hospital one time, and, the next time I went to see her, she looked a lot better, and I was like, "Wow, you look really good," and she goes, "Well, I wasn't looking good before." I said, "Oh, no." I said, "It looked like that was I was about to just say, goodbye that right then and there." And we just laughed about it. She goes, I'm like, "Yeah." I said, "But you look really nice right now." I said, "You know what? No matter what, you're just gonna live while you're living, and we'll deal with everything as it comes." And so that was what I did. I was honest. I gave her that kind of support. One thing about being in a deaf doula capacity is helping someone understand and embrace the idea that of course they death will happen, and kind of let them become more comfortable with it in a more gentle way. So that was a lot of what I did, and I wasn't the only person who did that. She had her other friend, other people would try to help along the way. So that was the other thing. You had to meet her where she was depending on the day. There's some days where she had lofty goals, she was going to go travel and do all this stuff, and other days where she wouldn't talk like that, and you just were there for every day. Like I was there for whatever conversation was going to happen, was going to happen. I didn't really direct it. Some days she just wanted to know about my life, what I was doing, and I would share that. Some days she would not feel so bad, about how she looked, and she was more happy that I was healthy, and she would say that. Um, and it just depended, like depending on the day. But the big thing about being a deaf doula is just being there as companionship sometimes, and you can function in different capacities because there might be someone who actually helps them with like arranging the will part and figuring out how they want to actually handle those things, because that can be really difficult for people no matter what, of just trying to deal with the fact that and embrace the fact that life is, human life isn't necessarily eternal, right? Life is eternal though. So in that whole process, I didn't realize what I was doing, but it wasn't until afterwards I'm like, whoa, I think that's what I did. I consciously went into a situation knowing someone was terminal. I just didn't consciously realize that's what I was doing by showing up like that. I just kind of knew by intuition this is what I'm supposed to do, right? I'm supposed to listen to this person, support their dreams, whatever they are at that time. I'm supposed to, accept them with their ups and accept them with their downs. I felt like I was supposed to encourage them to do whatever they could do for themselves, and celebrate that, and I would do those kinds of things. It's funny, something that we found out. She was a wild driver. And so I didn't realize that her family would not let her drive. I didn't know this, but when I came over, I'd be like, "Let's go." So I'd be a passenger in the car of her driving, and they wouldn't let her drive. But I would. I wasn't really the one allowing it. I was like, "Yeah, you driving? Let's go." And so she'd hit the road, and so she'd have that level of independence. And we kind of laughed about like, "You really got into the car?" I'm like, "Yeah, I got into the car, just strapped myself in and just hope for the best." And that's what I would do. Like I would actually tell her that. I'm like, "All right, I'm ready for this adventure." And I get in and, do that. I mean, we got to where we needed to go. She never ran any lights. There's only one time, and that was her last time she drove, where she turned into the ongoing traffic. But it was in a strip mall, and it was kind of like no one was there, and there was no one coming. So I was like, oh, and I was like, and it was a gentle little correction. I'm like, you know what? You're not in the right spot. You gotta get to the right. Oh, okay. And then she got over to the right, and that was it. But then after that, I think that was the last time she drove. I drove. I drove for the rest of the time. But anyway, with that, it just become this accidental thing, and I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad that I had that experience, but it wasn't something that I meant to do. But I realized after doing it all, I'm like, this is something that I might really look into. So if any of you all are ever interested or thinking about something like that, it is a real thing. It is something that you can do. There are different certifications that one can get, and it is a worthwhile journey, because I can say this, it was a very fulfilling journey for me. As I was driving home from the memorial, I called my aunt, and as I said, my grandmother had died from the same kind of cancer, and I never met my grandmother. So there was a bit of a connection there for me of actually kind of seeing that and just kind of having an understanding of what that journey could have been for her. And so it was amazing to watch that. But with I was talking to my aunt, and the first death that I had ever experienced was very traumatizing, because meaning of someone close to me, and that was because they died from, ending their own lives. And so it was just, I had no tools. I was not equipped at all. Had to go to therapy and the whole thing. And this time around, uh, we were just talking about it, and she said, "I'm just so grateful that you had such a positive experience with death." And I'm like, I'm grateful too. I'm like, because it's a part of life, but to be able to have this positive experience really just made me feel so much better about that aspect of life. So just throwing it out there, because that is what it did for me. And so if you ever feel that calling and you feel that you might be able to support someone, I say go for it, because it's a part of life, and it's something that, yes, like totally, I mean, I'm grieving, I'm mourning, all of that, but it's not painful. It's just more, I would just say I'm full of gratitude. I am sad, of course, for their physical absence, because they were a wonderful person. But more than anything, I just am happy that I answered the call. And if that call would ever come again, I'd answer it again. And so I would do it over and over and over again, just because of what I felt it meant for me, and maybe what it meant for her as well.